We move on to politics this morning, and President Obama gearing up for a pivotal swing state bus tour touting American jobs following the holiday as new poll numbers show where independents stand on health care. And today, the Obama campaign pivoted back to Bain, an attack strategy that is apparently working in the battleground states. Take a look at this new ad out.
Mitt Romney's companies were pioneers in outsourcing U.S. jobs to low-wage countries. He supports tax breaks for companies that ship jobs overseas. President Obama believes in insourcing. Outsourcing versus insourcing. It matters.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Let's say good morning to Tuesday's Political Power panel. Washington Post editorial writer Jonathan Capehart, former Ohio governor and current co-chair for the Obama campaign, Ted Strickland, and MSNBC contributor Susan Del Percio. It's great to see all three of you. Jonathan, I want to start with you because the Obama campaign plans to hammer Romney on outsourcing. Joe Biden just a few moments ago pushing the Romney out of touch point to a crowd in the Capitol. Take a listen to this.
The governor said not long ago that these students have to be willing to take a chance. How? Go home and borrow money if you have it from your parents. If you have to from your parents. How do you know you can go home and borrow money to start a new business from your parents? And he says the president's out of touch? How many of y'all have a Swiss bank account?
All right, so average Joe here on the stump. Jonathan, as we wait for the critical June jobs report, how important is it for the president to define Mitt Romney on this economy?
It's very important. And, you know, the Bain attacks, the clip that you showed of Vice President Biden talking about Romney being out of touch from everyday Americans, this is the attempt by the Obama campaign to define Mitt Romney before he has a chance to spend the millions upon millions of dollars he's raised and the super PACs have raised to define Mitt Romney for himself. And so we're going to see these Bain attacks continue. As you noted at the top of this segment, those Bain attacks are working despite some of the discomfort some Democrats have had over the ads. They're working in those battleground states, and you know we should get used to this right up until and maybe even through the conventions, and then once we get through the conventions, we'll start to see, I think, more substantive ads out there.
So, Susan, this week, though, the message from Mitt Romney has been about repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act. But as we take a look at this new Washington Post ABC News poll, it shows that independent voters give Mitt Romney and the president high unfavorable marks on health care. So do you think that the Romney camp needs to shift off of health care, get its message back on jobs, the economy, especially over the next 5 jobs reports? As I was just showing you, there are certain writers out there that are putting out messages, the ceasefire from the Romney camp on health care. Laura Ingraham tweeting breaking news, the Romney camp and this ceasefire. Is it smart for Mitt Romney to pivot back to what he is strongest with, is his business background?
Yes. Right now there's also an issue that the Republicans in the House and in the Senate are talking about health care because that's their strongest argument for their reelection campaigns. But for Mitt Romney, it is absolutely about the economy, and he should move back there. It makes the most sense. But when we talk about the independents and how people feel in these polls, you have to keep in mind 40% of the people out there in that poll even said they were unaware of the Supreme Court decision last week. So people's priorities are their pocketbooks.
All right. So, Governor Strickland, we also have news of Romney's upcoming trip to Israel. This is going to highlight his foreign policy and the experience that he has of it. The relationship, though, between Mitt Romney and the Prime Minister Netanyahu. President Obama's relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government has been rocky, in part because he has not visited the country since he's been president. Is the relationship, though, the entirety of Mitt Romney's foreign policy chops?
Well, Mitt Romney has said some strange things about foreign policy. His attitude toward Afghanistan, what he says he may do with Iran, his comments about Russia being our greatest foreign policy adversary. So I think his foreign policy credentials are very thin. And I think his business experience is not something that he should be very proud of. As governor, his job creation record was 47th in the nation. He outsourced jobs to other countries. He closed factories. He cost workers their jobs and, in some cases, their pension and their health care benefits. I don't think that's a very good business record. And so Mitt Romney is looking for some way to distinguish himself in a positive light. He stood with the Capitol in the background, Thomas, right after the Supreme Court decision, and promised on his first day in office he would attempt to take away health care coverage for 30 million Americans. That's not a legacy that I think any president would be proud of. And so he is struggling. Obviously, he's struggling in Ohio. I think the president is doing well in Ohio. He's going to be here this week. He's going to be in Maumee, Sandusky, Ohio, Parma, Ohio, and we're looking forward to the president's next visit on Thursday of this week.
Susan, as the governor talks about there and Mitt Romney trying to distinguish himself, obviously, if you have Joe Biden out on the stump and you have the president out there, this is a coordinated effort working on their own ticket. Mitt Romney still working by himself, but there is a lot of talk about the sweepstakes and the people who are on his short list. And Chris Christie was out there today, of course, giving some interesting sound. Take a listen to this.
This is an election with one voter, Mitt Romney, and he gets to decide who he thinks would be the best vice president of the United States. The fact is, if Governor Romney picks up the phone and calls, then you have to answer the call and listen at least.
All right, so that means the door is open. Chris Christie and a lot of people wanted Chris Christie to run to be the GOP nominee to begin with. But does this really mean and signal to people that there's a Chris Christie potential there? As the governor brings up, Governor Strickland talks about Ohio. Rob Portman still could be pivotal in all this. I
think what we saw right now, after what happened with Rubio and if he was seriously being vetted or not, they opened up the circle a little bit more. But I still think you're looking at a Rob Portman or a Senator Thune or even maybe Tim Pawlenty. But the most important thing for Mitt Romney is to have someone he's very comfortable with, and also it's someone who doesn't kind of upstage him at times where, frankly, a Christie can say something and cause headlines for a few weeks.
All right, speaking of headlines, someone who is not foreign to them is Donald Trump. So take a listen to this, because Donald Trump was appearing on CNBC slamming Chief Justice John Roberts.
Roberts was reading the Washington Post and the New York Times, and he said, I can come out like a hero if I do what everybody does not expect me to do. And he voted, to keep it. And frankly, I think he should be ashamed of himself. I think John Roberts should be ashamed of himself. And interestingly, it's reverberating the opposite. He's looking like a dummy.
All right, so Jonathan, I want you to weigh in on this first. Donald Trump, who's throwing parties for Mitt Romney, raising money, but he'll go out and call the Chief Justice a dummy.
Right, because Donald Trump doesn't agree with the decision that the Chief Justice wrote. Imagine what he would have said. Maybe the Chief Justice would have been considered a genius if things had gone the way Donald Trump wanted them to go. Donald Trump has his perched there to say what he wants to say. We listen to what he has to say. We comment on what he has to say. But I think he has no impact, no effect whatsoever on certainly what most people think, but most definitely on what the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States thinks about his job and himself as a person.
Governor, the sword strikes both ways in all of this. Certainly Democrats want to be mindful of how they react to Supreme Court decisions. But in your estimation, how do you sum up how the right has reacted to how Chief Justice Roberts came down with his opinion?
Well, if Donald Trump's an example and he calls the Supreme Court Chief Justice a dummy, I would just say it takes one to know one for this man to assume that he is qualified to make a legal judgment about the Supreme Court's decision, I think is ludicrous. I was concerned, as I said earlier, Thomas, that soon after the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court spoke, Mitt Romney stood with the Capitol in the background and said on his first day in office, he would attempt to take away health care from 30 million Americans. That's what he said. I'm going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act will provide health care to 30 million Americans. And I think that's the issue here, not how the right wing has responded, but how Mitt Romney has responded.
Susan, I want to give you the last word because you were shaking your head while the governor
He did
talked.
not say he was going to take health care away from people. He said he believed in to repeal and replace, and that's actually what he said. The governor was putting a few words in Mitt Romney's mouth.
Well, it takes it a step forward to be, if I repeal this, it means that these 30 million Americans would lose access to what they've been granted today by what the Supreme Court wants to deliver.
Not if they're replacing it with a different type of plan. So it's just a little disingenuous to say that's what the governor said, is all I'm saying.
So what's the replace plan?
Well, there are a lot of different factors to it, but and Mitt Romney has come out and he does have to further explain it, but to simply say this is what the governor said is just not honest and sincere. You want to say
he said on my first day in office, I will go to work to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Correct.
The Affordable Care Act provides coverage for 30 million Americans. He did not say what he would do for those 30 million Americans to replace the Affordable Care Act. He simply said, I will work to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And that's what I said, and I stand by what I said.
Mitt Romney said something different. You meant, I understand where you were going, but I just was saying those were not his words, and to say they were is just not correct.
All right, well, at least we can agree that that is exactly what Mitt Romney said. The intention, though, is to take away that health care access for over 30 million people who would get it.
That's right.
And then replace it with something else.
Well, the replace part, we can go back and forth on that.
We can talk about it, but that's what he said.
If I had more time and my executive producer wasn't yelling in my ear, we could. But I have to go because I'm Nico Rules here. Jonathan Capehart, who we have to mention is Pocket Square. I mean, just killing it today. Look at him. Look at that thing.
Thank you,
Look at that thing. Governor Strickland and Susan Del Perso, thanks to all of you. And also, there's this great article about the what's going on with the Supreme Court out on Politico about Chief Justice Roberts and the rebound, what it means for the upcoming Supreme Court term, the fights on affirmative action, same-sex marriage, and voting rights. I'm going to speak with the author of this new piece, Josh Gerstein, coming up later in the hour. My thanks to all of you on the panel.